In the musty archives of St. Mary's Catholic Church in County Cork, Ireland, sits a photograph that has been deliberately hidden from public view for over a century. It's a baptism ceremony from September 1905, showing what appears to be a perfectly normal religious service. An infant is being baptized while family members look on with joy and reverence. But when church historians finally examined this photograph with modern, digital enhancement technology in 2018, they made a discovery so disturbing that it challenged everything they thought they knew about life, death, and the nature of spiritual authority itself. The priest performing the baptism was Father Patrick O'Sullivan, clearly visible in his ceremonial robes as he holds the infant over the baptismal font. His face is serene, his movements purposeful, his presence completely solid and three-dimensional. There's nothing ghostly or ethereal about his appearance. He looks exactly like what he was supposed to be, a living, breathing Catholic priest, administering one of the Church's most sacred sacraments. But Father Patrick O'Sullivan had been dead for 3 months when this photograph was taken. His funeral had been held on June 12, 1905. Over 200 parishioners had attended his burial in the church cemetery. His grave, marked with a substantial marble headstone, sits less than 50 yards from where this baptism was performed. Yet there he stands in this September photograph, apparently alive and conducting religious services as if nothing had happened. The investigation that followed this discovery would uncover one of the most comprehensive cover-ups in Catholic Church history, involving supernatural phenomena that the Vatican had been systematically suppressing for centuries. What started as a simple archival project became a journey into the darkest corners of religious authority and the terrifying possibility that death itself might not be the final word on spiritual duty. Father Patrick O'Sullivan had been the beloved parish priest of St. Mary's for over 20 years. Born in 1851 to a family of modest farmers, he had shown an early calling to the priesthood that impressed everyone who knew him. His seminary professors described him as exceptionally devout, intellectually gifted, and possessed of an unusual spiritual intensity that set him apart from his peers. He was ordained in 1875 and immediately assigned to St. Mary's, where he would serve until his death. The parish records paint a picture of a priest who was utterly devoted to his calling. Father O'Sullivan never missed a service, never turned away someone in need, and was known to spend hours in prayer before the altar late into the night. Parishioners described him as a man who seemed to exist in constant communion with the divine, someone for whom the spiritual world was more real than the physical one around him. His death on June 9, 1905, came as a complete shock to the community. Father O'Sullivan had seemed in perfect health the day before, celebrating morning mass with his usual vigor and attention to detail. That evening, his housekeeper found him collapsed in his study, apparently having suffered a massive heart attack. While reading his breviary, the local doctor confirmed that death had been instantaneous. There were no signs of struggle or distress. Father O'Sullivan had simply died while engaged in prayer, his breviary still open to the evening prayers in his hands. The funeral, 3 days later, was one of the largest ever held in the county. Hundreds of people came to pay their respects to a priest who had touched virtually every life in the parish. Fellow clergy from across Ireland attended the service, and the bishop himself delivered the funeral homily, praising Father O'Sullivan as a priest's priest, whose devotion to God and his flock had been absolute and unwavering. So when Mrs. Eleanor Flanagan brought her newborn son to be baptized on September 15, 1905, she was expecting to meet the new priest who had been assigned to replace Father O'Sullivan. The diocese had sent Father Michael Hennessy, a young priest fresh from seminary, to take over the parish. But when Mrs. Flanagan arrived at the church that morning, it wasn't Father Hennessy who greeted her. It was Father O'Sullivan, wearing his familiar liturgical vestments, speaking in the same gentle voice she had known for years. Mrs. Flanagan later told investigators that she hadn't questioned Father O'Sullivan's presence at first. In her grief over his death, she assumed she was experiencing some kind of wishful thinking or mild hallucination brought on by stress. But as the ceremony proceeded, it became clear that this was no hallucination. Father O'Sullivan knew details about her family that only he could have known. He spoke about her older children by name, referenced conversations they had had months earlier, and performed the baptism with the exact ritual precision that had always characterized his services. The photograph was taken by Thomas Murphy, a local photographer who had been hired to document the baptism. Murphy had known Father O'Sullivan well and had photographed dozens of ceremonies conducted by the priest over the years. When he developed the photograph several days later, he stared added in complete bewilderment. There was Father O'Sullivan, clear as day, performing a baptism 3 months after his own funeral. Murphy initially assumed there had been some kind of mistake with the dates or the film. But when he checked his records, everything was in order. The photograph had definitely been taken on September 15, 1905. Father O'Sullivan had definitely died on June 9. There was no possibility of error or confusion. Murphy locked the photograph away and never spoke of it publicly. But he did confide in his diary, writing, "I have seen something that should not be possible. Father O'Sullivan is dead, yet he lives. I fear I am losing my mind, or perhaps the world is losing its reason." The baptism itself proceeded without incident. Father O'Sullivan performed the ceremony with his usual careful attention to ritual detail, blessing the infant with holy water and pronouncing the traditional words of the sacrament. The baby's parents, grandparents, and godparents all witnessed the ceremony, though their reactions varied dramatically. Some seemed completely unaware that anything unusual was happening. Others appeared troubled or confused, as if they sensed something was wrong but couldn't quite identify what it was. Young Father Hennessy, who was supposed to have been conducting the ceremony, was found later that morning in the sacristy, sitting in a chair and staring blankly at the wall. When questioned, he claimed to have no memory of the morning's events. He had arrived at the church as scheduled, but the next thing he remembered was sitting in the sacristy, with several hours unaccounted for. Medical examination revealed no signs of illness or injury. Hennessy appeared to have simply lost consciousness, or entered some kind of trance state during the exact time that Father O'Sullivan was conducting the baptism. The official church records from that day present a disturbing contradiction. The baptism is properly documented, with all the required information recorded in the parish registry. The infant's name, parents' names, date of baptism, and other details are all there in what appears to be Father O'Sullivan's distinctive handwriting. But the signature at the bottom of the entry is that of Father Hennessy, even though he claimed to have no memory of performing the ceremony. Word of the strange baptism spread quickly through the close-knit parish, though people spoke of it only in whispers. Some dismissed it as mass hysteria or collective grief-induced hallucination. Others were convinced they had witnessed a genuine miracle. But the church hierarchy took a very different view of the situation. Within a week of the baptism, Bishop William Fitzgerald arrived from Cork to conduct a personal investigation. The bishop's inquiry was conducted in absolute secrecy. He interviewed everyone who had been present at the baptism, examined the parish records, and spent hours studying the photograph that Thomas Murphy had reluctantly turned over to church authorities. His conclusions, documented in a report that remained classified for over a century, were both definitive and terrifying. According to Bishop Fitzgerald's report, the events of September 15th represented a severe disruption of the natural order that threatens the very foundation of church authority. The bishop concluded that Father O'Sullivan had indeed appeared at the baptism, but that this appearance was not a manifestation of divine grace, but rather evidence of an unholy attachment to earthly duties that prevented the deceased priest's soul from accepting eternal rest. The bishop's report goes on to describe Father O'Sullivan's appearance as diabolic deception designed to undermine the authority of legitimately appointed clergy. He recommended that all evidence of the incident be destroyed and that anyone who spoke of it publicly be subject to immediate excommunication. The photograph was confiscated and supposedly destroyed, though it somehow survived in the church archives for over a century. But the bishop's investigation uncovered something even more disturbing than a single supernatural incident. A review of parish records going back decades revealed that Father O'Sullivan's posthumous appearance was not an isolated event. The church archives contained references to at least 15 other incidents of deceased priests continuing to perform religious duties after their deaths. These incidents dated back to the founding of the parish in 1847 and occurred with surprising regularity, roughly once every 3 to 4 years. The pattern was consistent across all cases. A beloved priest would die suddenly, usually of natural causes. Within weeks or months of the death, the deceased priest would begin appearing to conduct religious services, always during the most important ceremonies, baptisms, marriages, last rites, and major feast day celebrations. The appearances were always witnessed by multiple people and often documented in parish records or photographs. The church's response was equally consistent. Each incident was investigated in secret, all evidence was confiscated or destroyed, and witnesses were intimidated into silence through threats of excommunication or other church sanctions. The official position was that such appearances were either hallucinations brought on by grief or demonic manifestations designed to deceive the faithful. But the evidence suggests a more complex reality. The deceased priests didn't appear randomly or malevolently. They seemed drawn to the most sacred moments of parish life, the ceremonies that they had performed countless times while alive. Their behavior was consistent with their living personalities. They performed the rituals with the same precision and care they had shown in life. Most importantly, they seemed completely unaware that they were dead. Father O'Sullivan's case was particularly well documented because it occurred during the early age of photography. But earlier incidents, recorded only in written accounts, describe remarkably similar phenomena. In 1873, Father James McKenna allegedly conducted a wedding ceremony 6 weeks after his death from consumption. In 1881, Father Thomas Brady was reported to have given last rites to a dying parishioner 2 months after his own funeral. In 1894, Father William O'Connor supposedly delivered Christmas midnight mass despite having died the previous October. The Church's systematic suppression of these incidents was so thorough that even within the institution itself, knowledge of the phenomena was limited to the highest levels of hierarchy. Parish priests were not informed of the historical pattern. They were simply told that if they ever encountered unusual incidents involving deceased clergy, they should immediately contact their bishop and maintain absolute silence about what they had witnessed. This policy of suppression extended far beyond the local diocese. Research conducted in Vatican archives reveals that similar incidents were being reported and suppressed by Catholic churches around the world. A confidential document from 1902, marked Secretum Pontificium, Papal Secret, acknowledges the persistent problem of clerical manifestations following bodily death, and outlines procedures for handling such cases. The Vatican document is particularly chilling in its matter-of-fact tone. It treats posthumous clerical appearances as an ongoing administrative problem, rather than miraculous or supernatural events. The document recommends immediate removal and destruction of all physical evidence, comprehensive documentation of witness testimony for future reference, and appropriate disciplinary measures to ensure absolute discretion among the faithful. The document also reveals the existence of a special Vatican office, the Congregatio Pro Rebus Extraordinaris Congregation for Extraordinary Matters, established specifically to investigate and suppress supernatural phenomena within the Church. This office, which operated in complete secrecy, maintained detailed files on hundreds of cases of posthumous clerical appearances dating back to the medieval period. The theological implications of these cases were profound and deeply troubling to church authorities. If priests could continue performing sacraments after death, what did that say about the nature of death itself? More importantly, what did it say about the source of sacramental authority? Catholic doctrine holds that priestly authority comes directly from God through the apostolic succession. But if that authority persisted beyond death, it suggested that the spiritual reality was far more complex than official theology. Acknowledged. The cases also raised practical questions that the Church was unwilling to address publicly. Were sacraments, performed by deceased priests, valid? Could the dead truly absolve sins or consecrate the Eucharist? If Father O'Sullivan's posthumous baptism was genuine, what was the spiritual status of the infant he had baptized? These questions threatened the very foundation of Catholic sacramental theology. The cover-up was so comprehensive that even the families involved were pressured to remain silent. Mrs. Flanagan, whose son had been baptized by the deceased Father O'Sullivan, was visited repeatedly by church officials, who encouraged her to view the incident as a grief-induced hallucination. Her son's baptismal certificate was reissued with Father Hennessy listed as the officiating priest. Despite multiple witnesses who swore that Father O'Sullivan had performed the ceremony, Thomas Murphy, the photographer, was forced to sign a document swearing that he had destroyed all copies of the baptism photograph and would never discuss what he had witnessed. He was also required to turn over his camera and all associated equipment to church authorities, effectively ending his photography business. Murphy spent the rest of his life in poverty, never fully recovering from the financial and psychological impact of his encounter with the supernatural. The supernatural appearances at St. Mary's Parish continued sporadically for several more years. Father O'Sullivan was reportedly seen conducting services in 1906, 1907, and 1908, always during the most significant religious ceremonies. Each incident was documented by church investigators, and then systematically suppressed. By 1909, the appearances had apparently ceased. possibly because Father Hennessy had finally established his authority as the legitimate parish priest. But the pattern of posthumous clerical appearances was not unique to St. Mary's. Research conducted by modern investigators has uncovered similar cases at Catholic parishes throughout Ireland, England, France, Italy, and Spain. The phenomenon appears to have been particularly common during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, possibly because this was when photography first made it possible to document such incidents definitively. One particularly wet case occurred at Notre-Dame de Lourdes parish in Paris in 1903. Father Antoine Moreau, who had served the parish for 35 years, died of pneumonia in January 1903. In March of the same year, he was photographed conducting a wedding ceremony, standing clearly visible at the altar in full liturgical vestments. The photograph, discovered in 2015 during renovation of the parish archives, shows Father Moreau blessing the wedding couple while the congregation looks on. The French case is significant because it was witnessed by over 100 people, including several members of the nobility and 2 other Catholic priests. The incident was initially reported in local newspapers, but all coverage was quickly suppressed through Vatican pressure on French government officials. The witnesses were individually visited by church representatives and pressured to retract their statements. Similar cases have been documented in Germany, where Father Klaus Brenner allegedly continued celebrating Mass for 6 months after his death in 1899. In Spain, Father Miguel Santos was reportedly seen conducting Easter services in 1901, despite having died the previous December. In each case, the church response was identical: immediate investigation, systematic suppression of evidence, and intimidation of witnesses. The pattern extends beyond Europe to Catholic communities in the Americas, Africa, and Asia. A case in Mexico City in 1904 involved Father Eduardo Ramirez, who was photographed giving communion to parishioners 3 months after his funeral. A similar incident in the Philippines in 1906 involved Father Antonio Cruz, who allegedly conducted a funeral service despite having died 2 weeks earlier. The global nature of this phenomenon suggests that it was not limited to specific cultural or geographical contexts. Rather, it appears to have been an inherent aspect of Catholic clerical culture during this period. The fact that the Vatican developed standardized procedures for handling such cases indicates that church authorities recognize this as a widespread and ongoing problem. Modern researchers have attempted to understand the psychological and sociological factors that might explain these incidents. Some theories focus on the intense psychological bonds between priests and their parishes, suggesting that extreme devotion to duty might somehow transcend death. Others point to the collective psychological needs of grieving communities, proposing that shared hallucinations might explain the witnessed phenomena. But these explanations fail to account for the photographic evidence and the remarkable consistency of witness testimony across different cultures and time periods. The photographs, when subjected to modern digital analysis, show no signs of manipulation or double exposure. The deceased priests appear completely solid and three-dimensional, interacting normally with their environment and casting appropriate shadows. Perhaps most importantly, the Church's own response to these incidents suggests that ecclesiastical authorities believed they were dealing with genuine supernatural phenomena rather than psychological aberrations. The systematic nature of the cover-up, the involvement of high-ranking Vatican officials, and the development of specialized procedures for handling such cases all indicate that the Church took these incidents very seriously indeed. The theological implications remain profoundly disturbing to Catholic doctrine. If priests can continue performing sacraments after death, it suggests that spiritual authority operates according to principles that are not fully understood by Church theologians. The possibility that the dead might continue to serve the living challenges fundamental assumptions about the nature of death, the afterlife, and the source of religious authority. The 1905 baptism photograph from St. Mary's Parish represents just one documented example of a phenomenon that appears to have been far more widespread than the Church has ever acknowledged. The systematic suppression of evidence has prevented scholars from fully understanding the scope and nature of these incidents. But the available evidence suggests that posthumous clerical appearances were a regular occurrence in Catholic parishes around the world during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The mystery deepens when we consider the ultimate fate of these deceased priests. Did they eventually move on to whatever afterlife awaited them? Or do they continue to exist in some liminal state between life and death? The Church records provide no answers to these questions. The official position remains that such incidents never occurred, that they were products of grief-induced hallucination or diabolic deception. But the photographic evidence tells a different story. Father O'Sullivan stands there in that 1905 baptism photograph, as real and solid as any living person. His face shows the same gentle compassion that parishioners remembered from life. His hands hold the infant with the same careful reverence he had shown in countless previous ceremonies. Nothing about his appearance suggests death or supernatural manifestation. The infant he baptized, young Michael Flanagan, lived to be 97 years old, dying in 2002. Throughout his long life, he maintained that he had been blessed with a special spiritual protection that he attributed to his unusual baptism. Whether this was genuine spiritual benefit or merely psychological comfort is impossible to determine. But the fact remains that Michael Flanagan lived an extraordinarily long and healthy life, avoiding the diseases and accidents that claimed many of his contemporaries. The photograph itself was discovered purely by accident. During a routine digitization project in 2018, church archivists were converting old photographs to digital format when they came across the image in a folder. The archivist who found it immediately recognized the significance of what he was seeing and contacted church authorities. Within hours, the photograph was removed from the digitization project and classified as restricted material, but not before. High-resolution digital copies had been made and stored in the archive's computer system. These copies were subsequently leaked to researchers by an anonymous source within the church hierarchy. Someone who apparently believed that the truth about these incidents should finally be revealed. The leak included not only the 1905 photograph, but also dozens of other documents related to posthumous clerical appearances at parishes around the world. The leaked documents reveal the full scope of the church's cover-up efforts and provide unprecedented insight into a phenomenon that has been systematically hidden for over a century. They show that posthumous clerical appearances were not rare anomalies, but regular occurrences that required constant vigilance and suppression by church authorities. Perhaps most disturbing of all, the documents suggest that the phenomenon may not have ended in the early 20th century. References to ongoing extraordinary incidents appear in Vatican correspondence as recently as the 1980s, indicating that deceased priests may still be appearing to conduct religious services in parishes around the world. If so, the Church continues to suppress evidence of these incidents with the same systematic thoroughness that characterized their historical approach to the phenomenon. The 1905 baptism photograph stands as irrefutable evidence that our understanding of death, spiritual authority, and the nature of religious service is fundamentally incomplete. Father O'Sullivan's impossible presence at that September ceremony challenges everything we think we know about the boundary between life and death. His calm, purposeful demeanor as he performs the baptism suggests that from his perspective, nothing had changed. He was still a priest, still serving his parish, still carrying out the sacred duties that had defined his entire adult life. The fact that the Church has gone to such extraordinary lengths to suppress evidence of these incidents only adds to their significance. If these were merely hallucinations or photographic errors, why the need for such comprehensive cover-ups? Why threaten witnesses with excommunication? Why establish special Vatican offices to investigate and suppress supernatural phenomena? The answer appears to be that these incidents represent a fundamental challenge to Catholic theological authority. They suggest that the spiritual reality is far more complex and mysterious than official doctrine acknowledges. They raise questions about the nature of death, the persistence of consciousness, and the source of sacramental power that the Church is either unwilling or unable to answer. Father O'Sullivan's posthumous appearance at that 1905 baptism was not an isolated incident, but part of a global pattern of supernatural phenomena that the Catholic Church has been systematically hiding for over a century. The photograph serves as a window into a hidden world where the dead continue to serve the spiritual needs of the living, where devotion transcends death, and where the boundary between the natural and supernatural is far more permeable than we have been led to believe. Implications of this hidden truth extend far beyond Catholic theology. If consciousness can persist after death in some form, if the dead can continue to interact with the physical world under certain circumstances, then our entire understanding of human existence may need to be fundamentally reconsidered. The 1905 baptism photograph is not just evidence of a supernatural incident. It's proof that reality itself is far stranger and more mysterious than we have been allowed to know. And perhaps most chilling of all, It suggests that those who control religious and scientific institutions have been deliberately keeping us in the dark about the true nature of life, death, and everything that lies beyond our mortal existence.